As I have mentioned before, natural gas becomes one of the most important fields in energy security. Since the early 2000s, natural gas markets become highly politicized. And it's very different from other markets, like, for example, coal or oil. Let's imagine, for example, that up to 40% of British coal imports are provided by Russia, but nobody cares about. It's very different with the natural gas sector. Natural gas dependency is a security issue because partly of the politicization issue. Another reason why the natural gas is such a complex matter is because of the complexity of industry. We should have a look at the rigidity of the gas markets. Why they are so rigid? Because look at this map. They are mostly regional, unlike coal and oil. And they are regional because the pipeline transportation is costly, and it can exist in the areas with important demand pools. You see in red lines here some flows in gas pipelines, cross-border flows in gas pipelines, which exist around the world and which are mostly concentrated in Eurasian region and in North America, with a growing role of East Asia, at least China. However, we also see the blue lines, which reflect liquefied natural gas, which is usually transported by ships. Most of the liquefied natural gas is consumed by Japan, South Korea, and increasingly China. Liquefied natural gas also penetrates in Western Europe, which becomes one of the important players in liquefied natural gas consumption. In both pipeline sector and liquefied natural gas, the cost of transport is very important. Let's see a cost decomposition of pipeline transport. We can see that up to 80% of the gas price may be constituted by transport costs. And that is extremely different from oil and coal, where transport costs do not constitute a major share in the cost structure. Here, on the contrary, we have to consider quite important operation and maintenance costs, which are usually calculated in dollars per certain distance and per unit of volume. And smaller the pipeline is, higher the operational and maintenance costs are. One of the reasons is because the unit of volume will then decrease in case of the smaller pipeline. Pipelines also include costs of compressor stations, which also use actually natural gas, so-called fuel gas or technical gas, which serves to use the compressor stations. These are usually calculated on in dollars per British horsepower. Then, quite important to understand the level of capacity of the pipeline. So you can see that natural gas pipeline sector is extremely complex area with subsequent high risks. Actually, an average cost of the pipeline is about $1 million per kilometer. From the very beginning of the natural gas industry, we observed a development of vertically integrated companies, which actually possess the supply capacities or production capacities, which also build transmission and distribution capacities, and organize a supply. Transmission and distribution lines, practically the pipelines, are vertically integrated natural monopolies. And the supply at the very initial stage of the gas industry was not market-oriented, but it was a supply-oriented industry. In North America or United Kingdom, as well as in Australia, small supply companies started to emerge in the gas sector. In European countries, mostly state-owned companies at the larger scale dealt with natural gas supply. Then with the development of natural gas industry, we see development of competition between various producers of natural gas, but these producers sell natural gas to the networks, the so-called single buyer model, which signifies that there is one buyer of natural gas which can be produced in different fields by different companies. So these companies compete for this single buyer who maintains a vertically integrated monopoly. And then in the mature markets, where demand growth is not that significant anymore, we observe a third-party access regime. And this third-party access regime consists in the following structure. Production is entirely separated from transmission and distribution, and these sectors are separated from the markets. So in case of transmission of natural gas via the transmission or distribution system, the supplier does not lose the ownership over commodity. That's why the regime is called a third-party access. Third-party access considered to provide a better security because different consumers can choose different suppliers. So there is more competition and hence better security. However, there are also market risks. So you can understand that third-party access regime supposes a separation of contracts of supply with the consumers from the contracts for transport with the transmission or distribution companies. And that may lead to the following problem, which is actually schematized on the slide. You can have a supply contract duration of 5 years, and then transport use, which is allocated only per year. And then let's see that we have only 2 years of contractual obligations for transport and 5 years of supply contract. That leads to a so-called supply capacity mismatch. In other words, no transport capacity contract to fulfill a supply contract. And are these concerns similar in the smaller and isolated markets, such as Baltic states? That's a very important issue, that natural gas markets are different from area to area. They are very specific in the United States, where a number of gas pipelines exist. The distances between suppliers and consumers are relatively short, and you have a very high level demand. So automatically, the market works. In the European Union, the situation is different. most of natural gas is shipped over long distances. There is a quite high level dependency of markets on vertically integrated companies. And there is a need to create so-called congestion management mechanisms in order to avoid supply capacity mismatches. And therefore, the European Commission, in cooperation with other European institutions, industry institutions, for instance, elaborated so-called network codes. More information about them you can see at the related videos, which we will propose in our annexes. However, these network codes were designed for big European countries and practically for large European companies. But here we would like to demonstrate a view by a small company, basically from Estonia, market of which is isolated and is tiny compared to many other areas. So, welcome to see the interview.